welcome. Let me start by asking all of you a very random question. What is the total GDP of the Arab nations?
Just give me 1 second. It's 2.9 trillion.
Yes, exactly. That's how easy it is to access information these days, at the click of a button, or several buttons in my mom's case. Information today is available anytime, anywhere, and it's for free. As a wise professor once said, knowledge is a commodity. We need far more than knowledge to make it in this fast-paced, competitive world. What we really need is innovation.
ها نحن نقف على عتبة جديدة مختلفة في حياتنا، نعبر من بوابتها إلى عالم جديد تتسارع فيه المعرفة ويتنامى فيه ركب التطور والتقدم. وعلينا أن نكون بحجم هذا التسارع الذي يؤهلنا كمتعلمين نحمل لواء القرن ال21. هذا العصر الذي عرف بالتكنولوجيا الذكية وبمجالات التعليم التي تشكل تحدياً لنا، لأننا مطالبون بتكييف العلوم والتكيف معها. إنه عصر السؤال الذي لا يتوقف عند حد، وهو ولادة جديدة لمفاهيم البحث ولإنتاج الفكر الجديد.
I have personally seen the benefits of integrating technology in our learning. Since my school, the International Academy Amman, introduced the idea of bring your own device, learning has become a lot more flexible, far more interactive and engaging. And this is what innovative learning hinges upon. A move away from rote learning to more understanding of concepts, development of research skills, and the practice of critical thinking. Such skills, as you'd all agree, are adaptable to every area of study and at university or even beyond.
And as an IB student, I can say that innovation is very much part of our classroom learning. In biology class, for instance, we use different experimentation methods, and as you can probably imagine, no two results are ever the same. But that's okay, because it's not about getting the exact answers, but about trying new things, taking risks, and accepting failures as lessons. Yes, that's part of our learning journey.
And yeah, Qatada, you know how most of us dread the extended essay because of the level of research involved. But the whole point behind the extended essay and even the Group 4 project is to promote independent thinking and interdisciplinary learning, where integrating disciplines is the only way to reaching a conclusion. Knowing how to do this is a skill that every student will need now and in the future. For jobs in the real world are akin to an interdisciplinary course, where different departments all interconnect under one umbrella.
And let's not forget the importance of community work in our lives, as it is an integral part of our day-to-day learning. Whether volunteering at Al King Hussein Cancer Center or just tutoring primary students, we are taught to give back and contribute to the well-being of our community. And while spending hours with the less fortunate is very humbling, reflecting on the experience and learning from it is far more rewarding. We strive to become better people and to make a difference in our world, however small that difference may be.
إننا في زمن باتت فيه المجتمعات منفتحة والثقافات متعددة، وهذا ما يدفعنا دوماً أن نعمل بجد على فهم اللغة التي تتواصل من خلالها الشعوب والأمم لتتبادل المعارف والعلوم المختلفة والمتنوعة، ليتحول الواحد منا إلى متعلم مدى الحياة. فكان أن ظهرت برامج تعليمية كبرنامج البكالوريا الدولية التي تتركز في جوهرها على جعل المعرفة متداخلة بكامل فروعها الأدبية والعلمية والفنية، عدا عن أنها تغرس في نفس الطالب قيماً ثمينة، لعل من أبرزها حب الوطن وخدمة المجتمع، تتكلل بأنشطة يقوم فيها الطالب بتحقيق العمل التطوعي لصالح إحدى مؤسسات الوطن والمجتمع المحلي. وخلاصة القول، إن برنامج البكالوريا الدولية أشبه بشجرة راسخة جذورها في الأرض وثمارها طالب باحث متقبل متسائل مجازف وواع لمسؤولياته.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, there is no person better qualified to talk to you about innovation than our guest today. Dr. Tony Wagner currently serves as an expert in residence at Harvard University's New Innovation Lab and as a senior research fellow at the Learning Policy Institute. Prior to these appointments, Dr. Wagner was the first Innovation Education Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the founder and co-director of the Change Leadership Group at Harvard for more than a decade. His previous work experience includes 12 years as a high school teacher, a K-8 principal, a university professor in teacher education, and the founding executive director of Educators for Social Responsibility.
As if that's not enough, Dr. Wagner is also a frequent speaker at national and international conferences, and the widely published author of numerous articles and 6 books, all of which have received worldwide recognition, making bestseller lists. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Tony Wagner.
It is an honor to be with you today, an honor and a joy. Before I begin, though, I need to reassure you. I need to tell you that I believe all of our Muslim brothers and sisters will always be welcome in America, along with all other populations. I mean this very, very seriously. Our so-called president does not represent the majority of Americans who will continue to welcome all peoples from all nations. Shukran. You know, when I began my teaching career, everyone talked about a knowledge economy. That we were having, instead of an industrial economy where people made things, machines do that now, we had a kind of economy where the more you knew, the better your opportunities. And it was also a world in which in order to acquire knowledge, you needed a teacher. We teachers had the books. We teachers had the knowledge. But that's not true today, is it? None of it. Knowledge today has become a commodity, like air, like water, growing exponentially, changing constantly, on every internet-connected device. You no longer need a teacher to acquire knowledge. In fact, as my wife, who's here today, PJ, and I wandered around Jordan and in other countries in the Middle East, what did we see? What was the most common sight we saw? This. In every young person's hands. Doing all kinds of things, sometimes acquiring knowledge. No, what we have today is an innovation era, not a knowledge economy. An era where the world simply no longer cares how much you know because Google knows everything. What the world cares about now is not what you know, but what you can do with what you know, which is a radically different education challenge. And the implications for our children are profound. Here's why. Growing numbers of employers no longer trust that piece of paper called a diploma. Because what does a diploma certify? All too often, it certifies the amount of seat time you have served in courses acquiring knowledge. It does not certify core competencies. Give an example. Google. Google used to be a company that only hired students from the very most elite universities around the world. They would only interview those students who had the various highest test scores and grade point averages. Well, along comes Laszlo Bock, senior vice president at Google. He analyzes the data, and he discovers all of the information they have been using to make important hiring decisions have been worthless. His word. He goes on to say the skills you need to succeed in a competitive academic environment bear no relationship to the skills you need to succeed in the innovation era. Well, I thought, that's Google. That's California. You know those people. But then, 3 years ago, I was in Ho Chi Minh City at the invitation of Deloitte to speak to area business leaders. I had lunch with the CEO, and she knew of my affiliation with Harvard, and she kind of looked at me and she said, you know, smiling, you know, we used to hire the best students from the best universities, but we don't do that anymore, she said, because it turns out they don't work out so well. She said, now we look for good students and we put them through a summer-long boot camp to see how they solve problems collaboratively. So here's our challenge. Our challenge is to better understand what does it mean to deconstruct the education system of the past, and what are the principles for reconstructing the education system of the future. What must we do differently to prepare all of our children for their future, not our past? Well, first, some definitions. What do we mean by innovation? What do we mean by innovation era? Does that just mean high tech? No. I've discovered there are two kinds of innovation. One kind of innovation is about bringing new possibilities to life, imagining new things. And that's pretty rare. That's a matter of an extraordinary talent converging at a particular time in history. Think Steve Jobs, Apple. But that's only one kind of innovation. The other kind of innovation is all about creative problem solving. And that may include technology or may not. But it's about solving problems creatively, whether it is how to better utilize water in a dry country, how to create better health care for all, how to improve education. One of the young people whom I interviewed actually worked in Africa and created a very simple little device that would attach to the back of a bicycle, enabling a farmer to grind his corn without having to go far away to the market, attaching it to the back of the bike so he could get on the bike and grind the corn. That's creative problem solving. What must we do differently to ensure that all young people are creative problem solvers? Because you see, young people are born curious, creative, imaginative. That's the human DNA. The average 5-year-old asks 100 questions a day, and most young people in kindergarten think of themselves as artists. But then something happens. We call it school. Because you see, the longer kids are in school, the less curious they become, research shows. And the longer they are in school, fewer and fewer think of themselves as artists. So what do we need to do differently? How do we change that thing called school? To answer this question, what I've been doing in recent years is interviewing a wide variety of young people from now increasingly all over the world. All of them are creative problem solvers. Some in high tech, science, technology. Some are social entrepreneurs, creating new social organizations to solve social problems. Half of them have been women, half have been men. But all of them recognized as creative problem solvers. Some of them from privilege, some of them from poverty. So I've been trying to understand, what are the influences that have shaped their lives? What has helped them to become creative problem solvers? I interviewed their parents to see if I could discern patterns of parenting. And of course, I asked them about their education. That led to my first very troubling discovery. You see, some of them had come from leading universities, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, just to name 4. And they all told me they had become creative problem solvers in spite of their university education, not because of it. Kind of demoralizing. But I talked further with them. I said, can you tell me about a teacher who's made a difference in your lives? This is you. They all could name at least one teacher, sometimes several. The grade range of those teachers was first grade to graduate school. So you know what I did? I went and interviewed all of those teachers to see if I could see what they were doing that was different. And I discovered a pattern, another very disturbing pattern. You see, all of those teachers were outliers. I don't know the Arabic word for outliers. I hope you get the translation. Someone who is teaching outside the norm, someone who's teaching differently than his or her colleagues, And I went and interviewed those teachers, I observed them teach, and yet I discovered they were teaching in ways that were remarkably similar to one another, even though they didn't know each other, even though they were in different countries. There was a pattern of learning and teaching that was different. And then I spent time observing and interviewing in those few schools that really successfully teach creative problem solving. I went to the MIT Media Lab, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I went to the brand new Olin College of Engineering. I went to the Stanford School of Design, Institute of Design. I went to High Tech High, I went to New Tech High. I've been to some international baccalaureate schools. I went to Reggio Emilia classes. I went to Montessori schools. And again, I saw a pattern, a remarkable pattern of learning and teaching that is fundamentally different than what we see most of the time in most schools and countries around the world. So what I've come to understand is that there are 7 fundamental contradictions between the old culture of schooling and the new culture of learning that we must construct to enable all of our young people to be the creative problem solvers they want to be and need to be. And let's be clear, these new ways of learning are not just about getting a better job and having a better future. Yes, they are that. But what I've also discovered is that the skills and dispositions you need for work in the innovation era are exactly the same skills and dispositions we need for all citizens to have, for active and informed citizenship. And they're the same skills and dispositions we need to enable young people to be lifelong learners. So let's put these slides up and talk about them, please. There. Great thanks to my friends who translated this on very short notice yesterday, because my Arabic is not so good. But let's talk. The first thing I came to understand is that while we traditionally focus on measuring individual achievement, the world of innovation is all about teamwork. And so these teachers created projects that demanded collaboration. The second thing I discussed is that while we traditionally separate subjects, you know, there's physics and there's science and there's English and there's history, you cannot understand, let alone solve a problem using just one academic discipline. So the courses that I've seen that have been most successful have been interdisciplinary, like the world of innovation. Traditional learning is so often a passive experience, sitting and listening for far too long. Whereas the world of innovation is about taking initiative, it's about creating, not consuming. It's about being active, not passive. Traditional learning is so much about assessing content knowledge, assessing what has been memorized. The world of innovation, however, is about using knowledge and developing skills for continuously acquiring new knowledge. Traditional education, and this is very, very important. I want to make this very, very clear. One of the worst impacts of traditional education is that we label kids failures. You know, we create a bell curve. And the kids over here doing not so well, made more mistakes, makes them failures. Let me ask you a question. I hope this translates well into Arabic. How many of you have learned more from your mistakes than your successes? Raise your hands. Yes, we all have. Why then? Why then do we penalize and punish kids for their mistakes? Because the world of innovation does not work that way. The world of innovation, you see, you go to an innovation company and they say, well, our company motto is fail early, fail often. Our company motto is fail fast, fail forward, fail cheap, but fail. What do they mean by that? What they understand is quite simply you learn through trial and error. And the more quickly you make mistakes and learn from them, the more successful you will be. So success is not about avoiding mistakes. Success is about making smart mistakes and learning from them. I have to tell you in confidence, there are only 3 grades that I can justify in a school. First, the grade of B, which is the grade that I expect every student to achieve because it is a performance standard. You meet that standard with a collection, a body of work, not an individual paper. It is a body of work, a digital portfolio, or before that I had my students keep paper portfolios. They met my performance standard for the credit. That was a B. Rarely there was really outstanding student work, and that was the A. The only failure I can acknowledge is the failure not to show up at all, not to try. From my point of view, anyone who has not achieved a B has work that is incomplete. I mean, I'll put it simply to you. How many of you would like to fly with an airline pilot who only had a C minus? An airline pilot who was maybe pretty good at takeoffs, but really bad at landings? No. That's not how the adult world works. The adult world says we expect competence, and rarely we would applaud excellence. Let's talk about motivation. So often the motivation I see in schools and traditional schooling is a motivation that is extrinsic. Rewards for good grades, punishments for bad grades. But what I've come to understand is that these innovators whom I've interviewed, and in these schools where I've been, there is far more emphasis on intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation. Students do their best work when it is work worth doing. Students want to go to work in those companies where they feel they can make the best difference. And then when I went back and tried to understand what had teachers done and what had parents done to encourage intrinsic motivation, what did they do differently in their classroom? And I found a pattern. Both teachers and parents explicitly encouraged 3 things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraged much more exploratory play, fewer toys, toys without batteries. Teachers created a time and a space for adult play in their classrooms. Children grew older, parents were really encouraging young people to try new things, to explore their interests. Curiosity became interests, which became passions, intrinsic motivation. Teachers the same, gave time in the classroom for young people to explore their own interests and passions. Finally, as these children grew older, both parents and teachers had instilled one simple lesson: the idea that we are not here on this earth primarily to serve ourselves. We have some responsibility to give back and to make a difference. That leads us to our final principle. So often in schools, I see one of 2 extremes. I see either schools that just pay lip service to values and to character. You know, they have something on a wall somewhere. But meanwhile, they're tolerating behavior that can be bullying or sexist. Or at the other extreme, they're dogmatic schools. They're teaching one set of values, without question. But what the world needs, what all young people need, is a sense of character in 2 domains. First of all, character in terms of what I call dispositions, tenacity, perseverance, self-regulation, self-discipline, the ability to take initiative, the ability to recover from setbacks. That's one kind of character. But then there's another, and it's simply this: a person who is grounded in a deep set of universal values. Call them Muslim, call them Christian, call them Jewish, call them humanist. It doesn't matter. It all begins with empathy, having a deep emotional appreciation and understanding of others. To me, these are the things that really matter most in education in the future. How do we move more from here to here? Here are some steps I could propose for you. And then I'm going to show you a little movie, give you some time to talk to each other, and then we're going to have a conversation, some questions. But here are a few steps you might want to consider. First, in your schools, If you have not already done this, you need to have a conversation about this changing world. Don't just take my word for it that students need to be differently prepared. Talk to your graduates. Talk to your employers. Talk to your civic leaders. Ask them what skills are most important today. What should be the portrait of a graduate from your school? What skills? What knowledge? Secondly, as you think about lesson planning, I would urge you to consider all of the things we've talked about, but distill them. All students need content knowledge, of course. But skills in the innovation era matter more than mere content knowledge. You use content knowledge as a grounding, but also to acquire skills. And motivation matters most, because if you're intrinsically motivated, you will continuously acquire new content knowledge and new skills all your life. So as you plan a lesson, think about those three things. What content knowledge am I teaching? How am I asking students to develop skills using this content knowledge? And how am I trying to build in intrinsic motivation, creating work worth doing? The second thing I would encourage you to consider as you think about your week's lessons is enabling students to have some time to pursue their own interests. You heard these students here on stage talking about how important it was for them to have opportunities to pursue their questions, their research topics. I was talking with them just before the session began today, and they talked with me about real excitement about their 10th grade research project, where they choose the subject. So as a starting point, I would suggest you invite your students to keep a journal of their questions and concerns about the world. Write down questions that occur to them, and you should try it too. Keep a question journal. And every once in a while, make time for the students to go back and look at their list of questions and circle the ones that seem most interesting or important or intriguing. And then give them time in that week to go pursue those questions and interests. Some teachers I know have been doing this. I had an email from a 5th grade teacher who said, well, what I've decided to do after hearing you is not give any academic homework for the weekend. Instead, I'm giving them time to pursue their own questions and interests, with a requirement that on Monday they come back and tell me what they did. Well, the first week she did this, she was pretty nervous. She did not know what to expect. So students came back on Monday, and one student got up when she asked, and he said, well, I've always wanted to learn a musical instrument. So I spent the whole weekend on YouTube working on this old guitar I found in the closet, trying to figure out how to play an instrument. Another student said, I've always wanted to know how to cook. So I spent the whole weekend cooking, looking through cookbooks. But the most moving one was a young Chinese girl who said, I'm adopted. I know nothing of my country's past, its history, its culture. I spent the weekend reading about my homeland. Another email I had was from a high school English teacher who said, okay, every Friday is your time to work on your projects. It can be anything related to reading and writing, because we're English. So when he announced this, the students in the front row, the ones who always have their hands up, they were like this. What? You're not going to tell us what to do? They didn't know where to start. Students in the back of the row who are usually woke up. They had all kinds of things they wanted to do. So he said it forced him to understand his students differently. Finally, I urge you to, in what ways feel comfortable for you, to be the change you want to see in your students, to model the behaviors we're talking about, to be willing to take a few responsible risks, to, above all, work collaboratively with your colleagues, because you cannot do this new work alone. You cannot figure these things out, how to do them, what's working, what's not, by yourselves. Collaboration is critical. Isolation is the enemy of improvement. Isolation is the enemy of innovation. Okay, so I want to show you a short video clip, then we're going to give you some time to talk to each other at your chairs. Friends, my colleagues and I have been working on a film called Most Likely to Succeed. How many of you have seen that in your schools? You can actually rent it go online to mltsfilm.org, and you can learn how to rent it. And it will eventually be available on YouTube and other places. But the whole idea was to try to show what these ideas look like in a real school. So it's a feature-length documentary film, but I just brought you a 5-minute clip. It's a 9th grade interdisciplinary class in a real public charter school in San Diego, California, called High Tech High. A charter school that is predominantly minority and nearly 50% students in poverty. You see 2 teachers working for most of the day in an interdisciplinary course with 9th graders. So when you look at the video, I invite you to look for and listen for 3 things. First of all, what content knowledge are students learning? Content knowledge still matters. What skills are they learning? Skills matter more. And how are they being motivated to do their very best work? So please, let's show this 5-minute video, then we'll come back and have a little conversation.
The philosophy of High Tech High is founded largely on the idea of kids making, doing, building, shaping, and inventing stuff. The engineers that I know, the architects I know, the artists I know, the great educators that I know, the entrepreneurs that I know, are all sort of perplexed and curious about how they can do it better the next time. And that type of perplexity leads to engagement, it leads to learning, it leads to innovation. We are trying to have that type of perplexity and curiosity get inculcated in our students in everyday practices.
In both Linkabit and Qualcomm, one of our problems was being able to hire enough qualified people, enough trained people. And so it was kind of a long-term view to set up High Tech High.
Oh, I don't think it's that the glue worked. I think I know what's wrong.
Like if you have tooth spacing in 0.01, the gears won't connect at all.
We didn't know that it was all going to work until maybe 4 weeks before exhibition,
Yeah.
3 weeks.
We knew that pieces of it were working, right? And even those pieces were impressive.
We had to learn about civilizations, the Mayans, the Romans, and the Greeks. And Scott and Mike didn't want to just teach us this, so they came up with this big wheel, which is a big gear, which has a lot of drawings on it, and it's connected to all these other mechanisms, and they each represented our theory. So I learned about the Mayans, the Greeks, and the Romans, and I really based my theory off of the Romans.
Mm-hmm. And why so?
Because it has to do with expanding. They were always expanding, and what I realized is that they were expanding not because, not just for the fun of it, but they needed resources for all the people back home, Italy and all the ones that they, all the new places that they took over.
Then they had to, on their own, develop and defend an idea on why they think civilizations rise and fall.
So we had to create like a flow chart just explaining what our theory was, and then we got critiques on it, and then we created a group one.
Another piece is on the mechanical side. They need to take what's already an abstract concept with their theory, and they have to take that and actually physically manifest it. They have some very preliminary metrics they need to use. They know that there's going to be a big wheel turning at a certain RPM. They know how many teeth that is, so they have basically a box to work within, some bounds to work within, and they have to make everything.
Yeah, I can get one.
I put the wrong side in. Oh my god.
So we have an exhibition that we're preparing for right now, and it'll be tomorrow night, and there will be thousands of people here looking at student work, students presenting their work, visitors looking at the work, students presenting their work to each other. And I think that idea of making work public, that's a missing piece to me in schools in general.
For most of you, this is probably the biggest project that you've ever exhibited. A lot of you, it's the first project that you've ever really had a public exhibition of. All right? Cool. We're going to be here. If you need to go, we understand, but we're going to keep working for a few hours. Break.
This idea of sort of making something and having a public exhibition and having people come look at it. And you have that feeling that we all have, like, how did they do that?
You really need to understand it, and you really need to understand why you need to know this to be able to complete the project.
What astounded me was that while doing research, my theory, it actually fit with a lot of these civilizations. It wasn't just like some random theory.
When kids have that feeling, it's transformative for them. I made this, and everyone's coming to look at it.
Okay, so what I would like to invite you to do now is introduce yourselves to your neighbor, person sitting next to you, and talk for a few minutes about what you've been seeing and hearing, what you agree with, what you disagree with, but most importantly, what are your questions? Because in about 5 minutes, we're going to have time for conversation together. 5 minutes. We have a couple of students who have wireless microphones. Please raise your hand, and the microphone will come to you. And if you ask the question in Arabic, I really hope somebody will translate it for me. Raise your hands for a question, please. Raise your hands. Now you can see I'm a veteran teacher. I've taught many years, and I know all about this thing we call wait time. You know about that? I have 20 minutes to wait for your questions. Sorry? Watch time, I'm watching. Oh, lunchtime. Well, I was told it was till 1:30. If you want to take a vote, how many would rather just have no questions and go straight to lunch? Raise your hands. It's a democracy, we can do that. Of course, lunch won't be ready, Hife says, for 20 more minutes, so that won't work. Questions, comments, concerns? Here's a hand here, please. Where's the mic? Close to the mic so I can hear, please.
Thank you very much. To start with, very interesting so far. Dr. Wagner, what if we don't have resources? I mean, the school we saw has a lot of resources. Now, some countries cannot afford all these machines and so, you know, what's the alternative?
Yeah. Everyone hear the question? What about schools that don't have resources? Very, very important question. First of all, that school had some machines, but they didn't have other things. You know, most American schools, many schools around the world, have a lot of varsity sports, which are very expensive. That school chose not to do that. They cut other things in order to make more of a budget for that work, for classroom work. But you know, it costs nothing to ask students to write down their questions, to make a little time each week for students to explore their questions and interests. You don't need fancy tools for that. I didn't have those kinds of tools when I was teaching. So I think you start wherever you feel most comfortable, where you feel that it makes sense, with the resources you have. The first and most important resource are children's questions, their curiosity. Because curiosity creates interest, which develops passion, which creates purpose. It all starts with that kernel of curiosity. So my advice is start with that. Do whatever you must do to strengthen that muscle of curiosity. Great question. Other questions, please. Here's a question.
Hi. In your opinion, what would be the first step a school or a school leadership should take to move away from having the outliers in the school become the norm?
Yeah. Everybody hear the question? What's the first step every school might take? I think the problem we educators have is we spend all day working alone. We spend all day in our classrooms or in our administrative rooms. We don't have time to look up and see a bigger world. And so often we're teaching in the ways we've been taught. We're teaching the things that may have worked well for us in our past. So I think the first challenge is for us to become students. And I believe Steve will talk about this afternoon, leaders as learners. We need to become students of this changing world. We need to better understand what is going to be demanded of our students in the future. What will they need to thrive in their future? We need to talk to employers. We need to talk to our civic and religious leaders. We need to understand. That's where we start. We start by being learners as adults, learners about a changing world. And then I think the next step is to create a profile of what we want our graduates, students who complete our schooling, to look like. What knowledge should they have? What skills should they have? What dispositions or character should they have? And then finally, we need to work together over time to think about how are we going to best assess those capabilities. You see, what this school did was create what's called an exhibition night, where twice a year, every student would have to present and defend his or her work. That was the ultimate assessment, not a paper-scored test. It was a test where you had to get up in public, like these two students did today. That's a powerful assessment. So those three steps: understanding a changing world, creating a profile of a graduate, and there's a new website, by the way, that has tools called profileofagraduate.com that you can use to create your profile and to see profiles that other schools have created. And then think hard about assessment, because if you have new goals without the assessment, it means nothing. Okay, time for a few more questions. There's 2 questions right here.
I will ask in Arabic. Excuse me.
Well, so who will translate for me, please? She's going to ask in Arabic. Who do we have for a translator? How about one of my students? Come on, help her out. Come on.
أول سؤال ماذا على المعلم؟ السؤال الثاني هل برأيك تقع المسؤولية العظمى على المعلم نفسه؟
Too late now. What is the gist of the question, please? Louder, please.
What should the teacher do if he wants this kind of student? The first question.
Should a teacher do?
To get this kind of question. What should the teacher do if he wants this kind of students?
You mean a student who asks questions? First one, what? This is a team effort. You see, this is collaboration.
What should she asked you, what should the teacher do if he wants this kind of student?
Yes.
Just inquiring.
A more inquiring student? I think you have to model the behaviors. You see, the problem we have as teachers is that we came into this profession with the expectation that we should know everything, right? And so how often do we say, well, gee, I don't know the answer to that question. How would we best go explore that? So we have to model the same curiosity, the same questioning, and not seem as though we are the font of all knowledge. If we want our students to be curious, to take risks, to collaborate, we have to do the same. We have to be curious, take risks, collaborate. Another question here, please.
Thank you. Well, you've mentioned collaboration and problem solving as skills that students should learn at school. What other skills, in your opinion, should schools teach to the students?
Yeah. Again, I think this is a question you need to take back to your teachers, to your parents, and to your community. I will give you one answer, but it's not the answer. You need to put this in your cultural context, in the context of your communities. But as I mentioned yesterday, and we'll briefly repeat, the 4 C's to me are the 4 pillars of the skills that are essential. The ability to think critically, to ask good questions, to be able to look at a text and say, is this reasoning make sense? Is this clear? Is the evidence being presented compelling? Why or why not? Whose other perspectives might we be wanting to hear? Is there a connection here, a cause and effect? These are the kinds of questions, habits of mind, that are all a part of critical thinking. There's a wonderful book by Deborah Meyer called The Power of Their Ideas, about the 5 habits of mind that really comprise critical thinking. They're habits of asking different kinds of good questions. The second skill is the ability to communicate clearly. I see your hand. We'll ask you next. The ability to communicate clearly. First in writing. Writing is incredibly important, and we don't ask students to do enough different kinds of writing. Maybe they do a research paper, maybe they don't. But out there in the real world, they're not going to do a 10-page research paper, maybe for college, but not for a job. They're going to have to do a very compelling 1-page statement to their employer, or a PowerPoint with bullets. They need to communicate in different ways for different audiences. They also need to learn to speak clearly and well, to be able to present and defend their work and their ideas, as these students did for us today. Finally, as a part of communication, they need to practice listening. That's a skill. That's a communication skill. The third is what we've talked about now, collaboration. Increasingly, all work in civic life, in nonprofits, and in the for-profit world, in the world of innovation, is all about working collaboratively, teamwork. They need to practice that in school. And then, of course, creative problem solving, which has been what I've been talking about today. The ability to think about a problem, to identify, is this the right problem that needs solving? You know, my favorite quote is the quote of Einstein, who said, the formulation of the problem is often more important than the solution. So what we're really asking students to get better at is identifying the problem that most needs solving before you start trying to solve it. To me, those are the 4 skills that are critical. And then, as I've mentioned before, the dispositions are equally important. The disposition of learning through trial and error, the disposition of initiative, of responsible risk-taking, the disposition to persevere, to recover from setbacks, and the disposition of empathy. I have time for a couple of more questions. I think we're next.
Dr. Tony Wagner, what are the methods needed to enter high-tech high, and how does high-tech high choose its teachers?
What are the messages for high? I'm sorry, I missed the first part. I get how does high-tech high choose its teachers? And the other question?
What are the methods needed to enter high-tech high?
Methods, teaching methods? Yes. Okay. You know, it's interesting. High-tech high is not the only way to prepare young people for the innovation world. It's one model. It's well developed, but there are many, many others. If you go to deeper-learning.org, you can learn about 10 networks of schools, more than 500 schools that are doing work like this, some similar, some different. But what they all require, to your very good question, is that teachers take initiative. You see, sadly, around the world, what we see are education systems that are driven by compliance. You know this word, compliance? There are bureaucracies that expect you to do the minimum to get by. So often in schools, teachers have to be compliant. They have to obey the rules. Whereas in these schools, the most important thing teachers have to be is to take initiative. And the second most important, what I mean by take initiative, to be creative, to work on projects. The second thing they have to do is learn to work together. And that's hugely difficult for us as teachers. We're not trained to collaborate. We have no experience in collaboration. We work alone all day, every day. But these problems are too complex to solve by ourselves. You saw those two teachers. You remember that conversation between those two teachers? We didn't know if this was going to work out so well. They were taking risks. We were working on this together. I've been to High Tech High many times. I went the last time, and there was a whole day these teachers had to present their plans for the semester to each other as an entire faculty so that they could get criticism and feedback. That is a very hard new skill we all must learn, how to give and receive feedback in a team. Thank you for your excellent question. Time for a few more questions. Right, Haif? Lunch isn't ready yet, Haif, right? See? No, we'll end promptly. I see 1, 2, 3 hands, and then we're going to stop. Okay, the 3 hands that are up. Yes, please, sir.
Yes, hello. Regarding new teachers, a lot of new teachers, they start off passionate, with big dreams to change the world, but few of those who actually continue to still have this passion. Most teachers, they get demotivated due to a lot of different reasons. But what is your personal advice to, for those teachers to keep on doing what they do?
This is a really interesting question. Here's an idea that some schools are trying to continue to motivate teachers to try new things. They're creating a little innovation fund. They're taking a part of their professional development money and putting it over here and calling it an innovation fund, and they're inviting teams of teachers, not individual teachers, to apply for a grant to try something new, or even to go visit a school, or to create a new curriculum. So I think that's one of the, it's about leadership, and I know Steve will talk more about this afternoon. How do you continue to motivate veteran teachers? It is about creating a community of learners, a community of practice, solving problems of practice together. That's the ultimate solution. That's the culture we have to create. And if for some reason somebody doesn't fit in, we have to allow them to leave. Say goodbye. 2 more questions, and then we stop. There's the 2 hands that were up over here, please. I think there were 2 women, yeah?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the session. It's not a question, it's a kind of comment. My friend and I, we have seen some parents watching their children. Maybe they get impressed wherever. Some of my students had a play, and I watched their parents watching them and having families sharing feelings, expressing, learning. I think that's what means culture, to get into family, to get into your beloved people, to share all together, will reflect on in the classroom, in the school, and in our society.
Shukran for your wonderful comment. Thank you. We have 1 more question, time for 1 more.
How are you? It seems to me, I don't know, for the past 2 days and your presentation right now.
Close to your mouth so I can hear you, please.
For the past 2 days and your presentation right now touched on a few skills that for me seemed like it needed a highly functioning moral compass.
A highly functioning what, sir?
Moral compass?
Yes.
I don't know, could you comment on this? And is there such training for such skills to improve someone's moral compass?
How to improve a moral compass? I come back to the fact that I think there are 2 different kinds of accountability in the world. There's top-down accountability, and that creates compliance, doing what you're told. That does not create a moral compass. Then there is what I call reciprocal, relational, face-to-face accountability. That's what those teachers had, where I am accountable to my colleagues to not let them down. I am accountable to my students to give them a worthwhile preparation for their future. I think more that we create face-to-face communities guided by certain principles and beliefs and aspirations. That's how we can strengthen one another's moral compass, and then have the courage to be able to coach one another, to offer one another constructive, useful feedback. Thank you for your excellent questions. Shukran to all. Let me, no, please, go ahead. Give each other an applause for your great questions. Yes, yes. Let me end You know, I'm a recovering high school English teacher. You understand this, right? And I mean recovering in a good way. I miss it. How many, see, and being an English teacher, you're supposed to quote literature. That's my job. And I haven't done that yet, have I? How many of you remember the opening to the famous novel by Charles Dickens called Tale of Two Cities? Do you remember that? It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. These are very, very challenging times in education. I don't need to tell you that because you live it every single day. But I also see that it is simultaneously the best of times. I have the rare privilege of going around the world and meeting with extraordinary educators like yourselves, who are asking the right questions, willing to try new things, willing to work with others to create a better future for our kids. So I simply want to echo Siva's thank you. Thank you for the important work you do. Thank you for your questions. Thank you above all for what you do for students every single day. Thank you. Shukran.